Welcome to the Renaissance in Quattrocento, Italy. Some of the things that we're going to be talking about today in these lectures, we're going to describe the impact of the Renaissance humanism on art in Florence. We're going to take a look at Florence as the epicenter of the Italian Renaissance. We're going to list the major formal developments in Quattrocento sculpture. We're going to outline the major formal developments in Quattrocento painting, and then with that kind of discuss the formal and material characteristics of 15th century architecture, as well, kind of how these all of these art forms play together. We're going to take a deep dive into the first public demonstration of perspective. We're going to take a look at what kicks off the Renaissance, a competition of all things. And we're going to kind of, just take a look at this relationship of humanism, science, and artistic reproduction, and explain the role of princely courts on innovations in and to support of the arts. Again, in the flourishing Florence, the epicenter, again, of the Italian Renaissance. And kind of like this idea to catalog the materials and techniques of Renaissance painting, sculpture, and printmaking. So, okay, so in this talk, we are going to be centering very specifically in Florence, Italy. Again, during the 15th century, it becomes an extremely powerful city. It's a banking city. It's very wealthy. It's a merchant city. It's a trade capital, and it's a power in the region. It's a newfound power. They had won a few of these, because these are city-states. They have won some battles between their neighboring city-states, and they have come out victorious. But one thing to note as well is that Florence at this time is it's a republic, and we're talking about the rise of humanism, right? We have to always keep that in mind. That is going to be one of the key components as we look at the content for this chapter, is that humanism is key. But Florence is a republic. It's a city that rules itself through elected representatives, and it's just like this going back to the ancient Greco-Roman ideologies. This goes back to the ancient Romans. These classical Greek and Roman ideas of having a humanist government allows for thoughts to flourish, right? So we have this very, very powerful city-state or republic in the area, and we're going to see the rise of this idea of the artist as genius. We're going to start seeing these very powerful families that come about. We're going to really take a look at what humanism means to this class of people, this artist class, because again, the Renaissance is this rebirth of classical culture, right, and art through philosophy, through thought. So humanism, again, if we look at that, if we remember, emphasis on education, emphasis on knowledge, their exploration of individual potential, the commitment to civic responsibility and to moral duty. And through this idea of individual achievement and again, not self-centered, but this idea of perfection or achievement, we are going to see that a goal of moral reform overall. And we're going to start seeing that it is morally irresponsible to be squandering God's gift of life to you. And so in particular, let's take a look, or take a step back real quick. So in the 1400s, in the 13th century, pardon me, the focus was on the work for the greater glorification of God. It was never about the artist. It wasn't about the work. It was always about the work itself. It was never about the person who made the work. It was always about what the message intended of the artwork was to be. But now in the 1500s, we are going to see this focus of the individual, again, kind of going back again to that Greco-Roman idea. But it is thought, again, that artists have a special gift that's bestowed upon them by God, this Platonic understanding of the world. And Plato has some interesting ideas of who are artists and who are artists and who are not, and what art is, and very specifically what art isn't. But he, okay, so put it this way, because God can make a tree, artists have the ability to recreate that tree. Because humanism, and in painting, as we've been looking, is really all about perfection, and it's about realism, and it's about capturing the thing as real as possible. So not everybody has the ability to recreate God's creation and recreate God's world. So they become kind of in this mindset of themselves and society around them to be the semi-divine type of individual. And then what we're going to see that comes out of that is, okay, so I had said that it was morally irresponsible to squander God's gift of life. And artists, if you're squandering God's gifts of perfection, and this doesn't necessarily have to be for artists. This could be for banking. This could be for trade. This could be for any type of the guild systems that we're going to look at again today as we walk through. But it's morally wrong to not improve ourselves. And how do we improve ourselves? How do we go about this moral reform? Well, fame. This is the outcome. Is through this idea of goal of moral reform, money and power. These are the measurements of one's character. So your character is then, right, in a different way, your character is then measured by the amount of money that you have, the amount of power, status, influence, artistic ability that you have. Those are a measure of somebody's character rather than attributes of what we, kind of considered to be a good moral character, being kind, giving, so on and so forth, empathetic. So this was thought to be morally irresponsible. So we start to see the rise of or this idea of fame, and really it's artists become superstars, international, world-known artists in some cases. And, so much so that my little joke here about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they become so ubiquitous and so kind of kitsch within our culture that we have cartoons about them being Ninja Turtles, and they're 600 plus years old, and we are still they're still very much relevant in our life, and they are still being studied today in schools. That's how much of an impact on the rest of the world that the Renaissance in Florence in the 15th century had on everything. This explosion of humanism, the this ancient Greco-Roman ideology coming back. And so let's take a look at the epicenter. Let's go back a little bit. Now this is our Cambio. This is the Duomo in the Florence Cathedral in Florence, Italy. This is what kicks off the Renaissance. And if we go back to the map, we are right here, the Duomo. This is what we're looking at, and in particular the dome. We're going to look at in part 2 of this lecture video. But what kicks off the Renaissance is this little building right here, the baptistry. We're going to take a look at a few other places on this map. The Santa Maria Novella. We're going to take a look at the Medici Chapel. We're going to take a look at a couple different churches as well. But this is where it starts. So this building here is the baptistry, and on the eastern doors so at the time when this was going on, the dome was not complete to the church. The baptistry was there, but the dome was not complete. And they built the baptistry, and they did not have the doors done yet. So they decided to put out a public competition, a public call for artists to make the eastern doors. And right, it's a contest. Now, so think about this one for a second. That's the most humanist thing that you can think of. It's a contest. It's a proving who's the best, right? The ultimate human achievement. You toil away for years. And again, we talked about guilds in the last chapter. We'll look at them again in this chapter. But the idea that some people dedicate their entire lives to perfecting their craft, their art, whatever that thing is. And you get to a certain point that you are considered a master at what you do. But there are other people who are striving to be masters the same as you. And when those competitions come in, and you have this hierarchy of people who are considered to be masters. Only one. There can be only one Highlander. So this is probably the most humanist thing that we could think of. So they put out a public call for artists. I think 25, maybe 26 contestants originally entered the competition. There were 8, I believe, semifinalists, and then it came down to 2 finalists. And we're going to look at those two finalists today, Filippo Brunelleschi and Lorenzo Ghiberti on the right here. So the contest was this. There were 8 panels, very similar to what we're looking at on the eastern doors, that needed to be completed. 4 on one door and 4 on the other. And they were to depict scenes from the Old Testament. But they decided to go with just this particular one. The contest was to depict and illustrate the Old Testament story of Abraham and Isaac. So if you remember that story, Abraham was promised a son by God. The son was to be a great leader. He was to grow up to be the king of nations. And his name was to be Isaac. But then Abraham, of course, said, well, we can't do it. My wife and I are too old. We can't have children. And God blessed them with a son. And then later on, as Isaac is older, God reappears to Abraham and asks Abraham to sacrifice him, his only begotten son, as a testament to his faith to God. And Abe, being a penitent man, does as God asks, takes Isaac to the top of the mountain, and is to sacrifice him. And just at the moment of the knife penetrating Isaac's throat, an angel appears to stay Abraham's hand, and God says, "Ha ha ha, gotcha, fooled you." No, he said, that was a test that of the faithful, and allowed Isaac to survive, so on and so forth. Okay, so let's take a look at these. Again, they wanted the church wanted all 8 of these stories, but this is the one that they're focusing on. Let's take a look at Brunelleschi. So, he was an older artist. He was well established in Florence at the time, so he was seen to be kind of the clear winner. He had been around; people knew him. He had some fame to his name, and had been working rather regularly. So, but he's older. And if we look at some of the things that we were talking about in the last chapter, he still stays to this kind of older Gothic style. And now there are some regulations to this. So this form here, this circle with this triangle form, this is called a quatrefoil. This is a very typical late Gothic kind of motif, and all artists had the same backgrounds to deal with. They all had to use the quatrefoil. And as a matter of fact, each contestant was given the same materials. They were each given 4 panels of bronze to sculpt with, and so they had some limitations that they were working within. But Brunelleschi is definitely pulling from his older traditions, and it's very flat and unrealistic. He's using the negative space here to really separate all of the people within the scene. Of course, we have, again, kind of this outside of this quatrefoil shape, but we have this rectilinear form here in the foreground. We have this very triangular form here with the bodies, right? And then we have these circular forms. So it's very logical, very sequential, very flat, though. It's very unrealistic the way that the forms are kind of placed within the image itself. And we see the angel here that has his hand on Abraham's arm, saving Abraham from killing Isaac. Excuse me, but it's just kind of very flat. But it's very easy to read. That's really, although it's unrealistic, it is very easy to read. But let's take a look at Gilberti's, because he is the winner. And it's kind of, it's a long story. They didn't really have a winner. They couldn't really decide. They ended up with Gilberti being the one who did the Eastern doors, but they ended up changing them. It's a long, convoluted, messy story that we're not going to get into today, but it is... for all practical and intent purposes, let's just say that this is our winner. Now, he was younger. He was really arrogant. He was very full of himself, and he wanted to make a name for himself. He was a very up-and-coming humanist artist, and he really wanted to push the boundaries of what was acceptable, and he achieved that here. And as a matter of fact, just to illustrate kind of this idea of being young and cocky and arrogant, every artist was given the same amount of materials, these 4 panels of bronze, and the story goes that Lorenzo Ghiberti, when he brought his submission in, he only used 2 panels of bronze, and he returned the other 2 and said that he didn't need them. Essentially saying that he made his perfect on the first try, because you have one panel of bronze to sculpt with, to use, and then one to sculpt on and to adhere it to. So essentially saying that he did it right the first time. So he was very, very full of himself, very confident in his abilities. But so we see a lot of, there is no rectilinear form here. We see this very organic layering of of forms. It's extremely complex. There is, again, no idea of, there's a little bit of the sight lines here, but they're overlapping, they're organic, far more than what we were looking at previously. The realistic idea of three-dimensional space, how things are in front, again, and overlapping each other. But there's a few other things in here that are far more notable. Well, the look on, I think, on Abraham's face as looking at Isaac. But more importantly, it's the angel that comes in that is almost too late, creating much more sense of drama, a much more sense, this more extreme sense of tension, because it's almost as if he hasn't made it on time, or he's going to miss, and Abraham is in fact going to end up killing his son. But the other aspect of this now, and if you look at the size of this, is only like 2 feet by 2 feet, roughly, right? So if we look at at Isaac, he's probably only maybe 3.5, 4 inches tall, so not terribly large. But he is nude, and this is extremely controversial and shocking, and this is the first time since the fall of the Roman Empire that a nude has been seen in public. So around 1,000 years, where during the Middle Ages it was considered to be a sin, sinful and shameful to see nudes in public. So that's why we don't see that during these periods. But Ghiberti decided to have Isaac nude. And again, if just as a comparison, you see he's not here. He is clothed. And but yeah, so this is the first public nude piece on a church, no less. And it really kind of rocked the foundations. So he did win, and he did end up making the eastern doors of the baptistry. But again, as we see a little bit later, we are going to take a look at their updated versions of the doors. All right, let's take a look at our first Ninja Turtle, Donatello, born Donato di Nicola de Beto Bardi. But Donatello, often we'll see that artists go by nicknames, or by just like what we would do now. But often they'll go by nicknames. Donatello, he was educated in the house of the Mertelli. Mertelli? Yeah, the Mertelli family. And they were this very powerful banking family in Florence, and they were able to fund artists and people going to artist guilds. And again, this idea of guilds, children would go to guilds, and there was a number of guilds. Again, there were artisan guilds, there were blacksmithing guilds, sculpture guilds, goldsmithing guilds, but trade guilds. There were silk guilds, there were fabric guilds, there were linen, all sorts of different styles of guilds. Any type of merchant type of activity you could think of probably was a guild associated with that. Now, and again, remember, guilds were extremely powerful because they were the institutions that would set the standards for what a master was. So if you're looking at artist guilds or a goldsmithing guild, what a master goldsmith requirements were to do that. They would set pricing, and they would set the trade boundaries or regulations for that trade. So they became extremely powerful and extremely important as this organization, and they were funded by different families, and we're going to see that a lot of different names are going to come up. We looked at the Van Eycks. We talked about them as the banking family in Northern Europe. The Mertellis. We're going to see again. We're going to talk about a family called the Medicis today. But so the Mertellis were this banking family in Florence, and they funded a lot of artists to go through. And Donatello was one. He studied goldsmithing and sculpture under Ghiberti. And he also happened to be, because everybody knew each other at this time, friends with Brunelleschi. And he and Brunelleschi would often go to Rome on these field trips. And they would study ancient Roman architecture. And they would study ancient Roman sculpture. And they would draw them. And they would just ingest everything that they could. And they would come back and they would make amazing achievements in these field trips. So I want to take a look at a few things and a couple different statues and a couple different things that are notably important that Donatello brings back from this the ancient Greco-Roman time frames. So this thing called the Quattrocento. Now, the sculpture in the middle, that is a sculpture of Doryphorus. You don't necessarily need to know anything about him or that. I just want to let you know who he is. But it's more about the Quattrocento pose. And Quattrocento is this idea of being well proportioned. It quite literally just means counterbalance or counterpoise. It's this idea. It's an idea of the body shown in rest and in motion. It was decided that through this natural S curvature of like the weight being shifted to one hip and the shoulder being dropped, shows the human form or the human body in the most perfect way. It is the most elegant stance that a human can take, and it's this, this idealized, again, perfect form, because that is what the ancient Greco or the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans strove for. So that is what the humanists are pulling out, and that's what Brunelleschi and that's what Donatello are pulling from these. So when we start seeing sculptures, now let's take a look to the left. The statue. This is in one of the niches, the little niches of the south side of the San Michele in Florence. It's a chapel. Niche is just a little cutout area, and these sculptures are all around, and they are dedications to the different guilds. And if you look at this particular one, we see that Saint Mark, we'll talk about that in a second, but is standing on like a linen pillow, and this is kind of a tribute to the Linen Makers Guild from Donatello. But he is in this Quattrocento pose. We see this humanist approach to these biblical figures. This is a saint, but he's not simply copying it. He's not simply copying the Quattrocento or simply like taking the ancient Greco-Roman sculpture, he's adapting it to like this Christian context, that man is this measure of all things, and by combining these concepts of perfectionism within this biblical setting, they are achieving this new hybrid of humanity and moral awareness. I mean, Mark is the writer of the gospel. He's shown holding a book, right? He's the one of the founding fathers of the writing of biblical literature. But he's shown, even though he is an author, he is shown to look as like he's a traditional Greek, Roman, pagan athlete. He certainly doesn't look like just a biblical author. I mean, this kind of looks normal to us now. This seems to be just a normal sculpture to us, but think about it back then. This was not in the Middle Ages. Everything in the Middle Ages, especially sculpture, if we look back at the last chapter, everything very specifically in sculpture was made to be unrealistic because they feared that if it was too realistic that people would fall into idol worship, and that would be a sin. And it was Jesus and God above all else. So a sculpture like this to show the Saint Mark as somebody with strength, self-awareness, confidence. He's educated. He's a scholar. He's a writer. He's sophisticated. It's showing his individuality and his personality and his face and kind of how he's dressed. Right. This is something different. This would be kind of akin to black and white TV to color TV. This is just it is revolutionary at the time. Again, having these ancient Greco-Roman kind of ideologies mixed with Christian philosophies of the perfection. And we're going to see this go through, and I think one can make an argument, at least, that the connections between some of the issues I think that we have within a religious context and religious society today are exacerbated by some of these philosophies from the 15th century that are going to be studied today. All right, let's take a look at another one from Donatello. This is St. George. This is a statue. Again, it's in one of the niches on the north side of the San Michele in Florence. The showing of this contrapposto pose, again, the shifting of the weight on the hips, putting more emphasis onto one with one shoulder kind of dropped, with the head pointing or looking at least off into the opposite direction. Of where the weight is shifted. It's just got this really nice, elegant curve to it. But here, St. George shows strength, right? This determination, but his skin, the way the sculpture is so smooth, this idea that he was able to take this medium and make the skin so smooth, he retains his youthful appearance. But even though that they're what is kind of starkly different from looking at sculpture and painting from the last chapter is that, again, the individuality of each painting or each sculpture, their personality, their individual personalities are coming through, and that is not what we saw in the Middle Ages. That is not what we saw in the Byzantine period or the Romanesque period, right? That is not how we saw people's painting angels and depicting the same face for everyone, the same expressions. And we're actually going to see a little bit of an homage to artists like Giotto again coming back. But also, real quick, we're going to look at something called atmospheric perspective in a few slides from now. But this is an example of bas relief, right? That low relief. Now, this is only like an inch and a little bit off of this, and the amount of detail that he has on such a these trees, how they appear to be in the distance because they're so far away. We'll talk about perspective and atmospheric perspective, but this bas relief was quite amazing, and this is why Donatello is a master. Because remember, Renaissance artists were above all they're interested in realism and a human-eyed view of the world, not just a symbolic one. They were trying to recreate God's world. They had these notions of that they had to, right? It was an immoral act to deny the gifts of God. Okay, so on the left is the statue of David. Maybe a different statue of the David. We're actually going to look at several statues, and you're going to come to find out that maybe you only know one of the statues of David, the most famous one, but there are hundreds of statues carved of David. But this is Donatello's version on the left, and we're going to look at Verrocchio's. He's the one on the right, and again, this idea of the Doryphorus on the far right. So we all know David, this biblical character who fights Goliath, right? The Philistine warrior, the giant, slays him with a pebble and a sling. And it's kind of noted why there are so many Davids sculpted, and this idea of Florence. I told you that Florence were having these battles with neighboring city-states. They had just won a fairly major battle with Naples, and they kind of saw themselves, because at the time Naples was had more of an economic power. They had a bigger military, and it ended up that Florence beat Naples, or was victorious over Naples. So much like David being victorious over Goliath, a much more substantially sized opponent, Florence saw themselves as David, and they kind of adopted David as their mascot. So we'll see this kind of motif a lot when we look at Florentinian art. But Donatello has him looking very childlike, very youthful. He was somewhere between 12 and 15 when he slayed Goliath. But he had this arrogance, this kind of this snottiness. The use of the materials, bronze, rather than sculpting it from marble. Bronze has this extremely smooth, shiny exterior to kind of like highlight his youthfulness and his athletic sleekness. But again, he's nude. And Donatello, this is the first full-size, large-scale, life-size nude sculpture. And again, over 1,000 years. This was just not done before. So, right, it was then I guess like the idea of the nudity was used to portray this biblical hero rather than used as an allegory for sinfulness. And I think that's kind of where we'll look at some pieces. I'll show you Adam and Eve and the expulsion of the Garden of Eden, where we see this again. Again, nudity is not this shameful, sinful thing like it was in the Middle Ages. So we're going to see a lot more nudes come in. But again, this is like revolutionary at the time. But it's also I don't know. It's funny. Uh, he's this little 12 to 15-year-old, really arrogant kid who just slayed Goliath, this warrior, and he kind of has this smirk on his face. He's standing on his head. He's poking his head with his sword. Whereas in the one from Verrocchio, although Goliath's head is at his feet, grotesque nonetheless, he's standing with a little bit more, instead of his hand curled around, it's on his hips, where he is a little bit more of this manly, less playful, less arrogant. But I definitely think the one on the left is this, has this kind of snarkiness to it. But again, you see, this is a much more traditional idea of what we're going to see David in, with clothes on. So what we can learn from Donatello is that he is a master of materials. This is the pendant Mary Magdalene of the baptistry, of the San Giovanni. So this is wood. He was a master sculptor, and penitent is this idea of being humble, or not flashy, and the idea that instead of using stone or marble or bronze, something that was extremely expensive, this is wood, so it's not flashy. This is the opposite of flashy and fancy. The most humble of all materials is what he is showing here. But look how this is an abstracted, very grotesque kind of portrayal of the human form, which is a stark contrast to his David sculptures, or the St. Mark sculpture that we saw just a little bit ago. So, it kind of demonstrates his ability to capture pure emotion, and using the wood to effectively manifest that. Manifest this Mary Magdalene as this 60-year-old, so it's just master of materials. But I love the juxtaposition of the craggliness of the wood, but then the smoothness of the skin. It's quite nice. So we're going to look at a couple different pieces here. This is a sculpture from De Paolo Iaialo. I want to show you a couple different things. This idea of the obsession, and this is where we're starting to learn this idea of human anatomy. We haven't really figured it out yet. But we are starting to see forms that are right. We're still seeing forms that are not quite proportioned, that are not quite anatomically correct yet. But we have to remember at this time that we are starting to see it's the birth of really the scientific method of this way of having a deep interest in how the world works. And recreating the human form in a very scientifically accurate way, because they hadn't been up to this point. And the groundwork is being laid here for these principles, this rationality, this reasonability of how a human looks, how a human acts in the world, and having it be a non-emotional and an analytic kind of perspective. So here, the Battle of 10 Nudes, the muscles, they're so defined as if they lacked skin. We see that there's just a focus on perfection of the human form. We're no longer going to see people that are we may see them at an more advanced stage in life, but they're not going to be looking any less physically fit. They're not going to be old. They are going to not have beer bellies. They're not going to be overweight. They're not going to have all of these imperfections that humans have. They are going to be these idealized forms. They're going to be the most perfect forms. They're going to be beautiful. They're going to be muscular. They're going to be voluptuous. They're going to be the standards of what perfection is thought to have been or thought to be at that time. Okay, and then quick before I want to try and kind of change directions a little bit to look at a couple different artists, but I would be remiss to tell you about Donatello because he was a master of materials. He was also he did a lot of things within sculpture, and there was another aspect of sculptures that he did, a sculpture work that he did that were equestrian sculptures. Equestrian, of course, meaning horses. These were extremely popular at the time. This particular one on the right that we're looking at, I guess if you want to look at the one on the left, this is what they're copying from the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. So this one on the right by Donatello is Gattamelata. He is a condottiere, which is like this military commander for hire. He's basically a mercenary. But he, in this particular condottiere, helped Venice conquer. They're warring against city-states, against Padua, and to really kind of help expand the power of Venice. So this was a monument outside of the church of the Piazza di Santa Padua in Italy, and it is something that instead of showing this idea of perfection, here Donatello is showing this weariness or a sadness in Gattamelata's face. It's almost as if he is suffering from PTSD from all of the death and destruction that he has seen in the carnages of war. Essentially, he has he's dignified. He has a dignity to him. And he is focused on the humanity aspect of the things that he's seen. So it's a really, really beautiful sculpture. But I want you to be aware that Donatello did a lot of different things. Okay, so also much like some of the other of the sculpture from De Polio de Io, the other style that's extremely popular, still going on right now, is remember if we looked at this last chapter, the International Gothic style. There's still, this is kind of the last hurrah of the late medieval Gothic, with this extensive ornamentation, lavish, very lace-like, it's just so much. But remember International Gothic, because it was kind of like this international style, a culmination of all of the different things going on. It does still kind of contain some work, or contain elements of this like new naturalism, with the modeling and the light and shadows, this term, chiaroscuro again. This is a work from Fabriano, where he's developing this kind of recessional space. Again, moving things from foreground, middle to ground, background, but he still very much has the grouping, right? The layered people. Even though the faces might be different somewhat, they do have a chiaroscuro to them. They're that modeling, again, light to dark value that shows depth. They're still very much stacked on top of each other. So let's talk about Brunelleschi. Remember that guy? He's the guy that essentially lost the contest. Okay, so he is credited. He was a sculptor. He was an architect. He was a mathematician. He was an art theorist. I mean, he did a lot. And again, remember, this is the Renaissance. So the idea of, well, the Renaissance man, right, is the person who studies all of these things to better themselves. So he is essentially credited with inventing the one-point linear perspective. And linear perspective is this, I have a definition here, a mathematical system that uses lines to create the illusion of depth in a two-dimensional work. Now, he didn't invent it, although he is credited with it. Mozi, a Chinese philosopher, was working on linear perspective in the 5th century BCE. Al-Hazan, there was an Arab mathematician that was working on elements of linear perspective around the year 1000. And there's one of his contemporaries, Leon Battista Alberti. He's an architect that Filippo Brunelleschi was very much, again, a contemporary of, that understood how linear perspective was working. So by no means did he invent it, but he definitely, I wouldn't say perfected it, but definitely brought it into, much like looking at Johannes Gutenberg. Certainly did not invent the movable type, but he revolutionized the way in which that technology was introduced into the area, and it was life-changing. So I will give Brunelleschi those props for linear perspective. But let's take a look at that. Essentially, one-point linear perspective. There's 4 elements to make a one point, and 1 point you have to have a vanishing point, right? You have to have a horizon line where the earth and the sky meet. 3, objects appear smaller as they recede in space, right? So what that means is that you have to have all of these lines. If I were to draw all of the lines that go back to what are called orthogonals or sight lines, orthogonal lines will all converge all at the same point. Now, you've seen this in real life. And remember that artists are trying to recreate God's world. They're trying to recreate life. They are trying to be perfect, right? They're trying to create realism. And you've seen this. You go down the road. You know it looks as if the road comes to a point, but you know that those lines continue on and go parallel. So he does this to a successful degree. We're going to go look back at Donatello again, right? Because they're friends. They know each other. So Donatello is very much aware of perspective at this point. And we see this is a front to the panel of the baptismal front. And if we trace the lines that come back, we see that somewhere around in here we have a vanishing point. Somewhere in there. It's not quite perfect, and we'll look at one where here, again, this is Ghiberti. The lines don't quite math, but they're getting there, right? These are things that, like, I've never been seen before. Okay, so on the left, these are the new Eastern doors. This is a series called the Gates of Paradise. So this is at the San Giovanni, the baptistry at the San Giovanni. The eastern doors, the original eastern doors got moved to the northern side, and they ended up redoing the eastern doors. And if you'll notice, they look vastly different. First off, they're square, rather than that quatrefoil, that holdout from the late Gothic kind of imagery. They ended up going square panels because it was clean, it was rational, it was mathematical, it made sense, it had order to it. Again, going back to this idea of rationality and order, that's going to be very fundamental as well as we go through the Renaissance. Okay, so let's talk quickly about atmospheric perspective. Again, because artists were trying to recreate God's reality, they thought that they could. They wanted to make the paintings and the sculptures and the things that they were engaging in as real as possible. And atmospheric perspective, when things in the distance appear to you, they appear to be, they kind of appear to have a lack of contrast, a lack of detail, or less sharp, and less focused. And that's because air is not completely transparent. Not that they were suffering from smog and air pollution that we have today, but you definitely know what it looks like when you can't see through it, when it's foggy, or just in the distance. There's particulates in the air. It's not clean. It's there's stuff in the air. There's atmosphere in the air. So there's something between it, and it kind of degrades the optics to us. So they started to incorporate this into their painting, and we saw that a little bit with Donatello's that bas-relief with the St. George slaying the dragon, didn't we? With the trees being so minute and so close to the back edge of the panel, as if they weren't even there, but they were there. They were just so far in the distance. And it's because of this atmospheric perspective that we're speaking on. And I know that we have talked about chiaroscuro. We've talked about this light and dark, this monumental shift in the modeling of humans. But let's take a look at it a little bit more in depth. Again, it is this way of applying value to a two-dimensional artwork to create the illusion of three dimensions. And remember, we have shapes and we have forms, and their shapes are only triangles, squares, and circles. Those are the only types of shapes that we have. And you can't have, those are just shapes. And once you start adding depth to it by adding this idea of chiaroscuro or shadow, then you start having forms, right? And a form is a three-dimensional thing where a shape is a two-dimensional object. So the Renaissance, what we kind of learned from them is we have this kind of five distinct light and shadow area. We have highlights, we have a light, we have a core shadow, we have a reflected light and a cast shadow. If you look on the right, look at the light source is the sun. So first the highlight is where the light hits the round sphere. Okay, then the next one down is the light. And then and this looks normal to us. The core shadow, that's the darkest point, it's the opposite side of where the light is at. But then when we get down this reflected light, it's actually lighter than the core shadow because it's reflecting, it's picking up all the reflections from the light everywhere else. And then we have the shadow that it casts around it. So with these five techniques of adding depth, or this idea of light to dark, chiaroscuro, you can turn a shape into a form. You can take a Byzantine drawing of a two-dimensional person and have the woman that you see seated in front of you. All right, so with that, let's take a look at Masaccio. He's not a Ninja Turtle. Should be. There's a lot of, it's kind of hard to only have 4 Ninja Turtles. We will, obviously, we're looking at Donatello. Of course, we're going to talk about all of them, actually. Raphael, Leonardo, Michelangelo. But there are a lot more. So, Masaccio, he should be a Ninja Turtle. He's the 5th Ninja Turtle. And again, it's a nickname, as most artists had nicknames. Masaccio, it's Italian for Sloppy Tom. It's kind of funny. This is a notable thing. I always liked that one. So we see this use of linear perspective. We also see a really detailed use of atmospheric perspective. But he's still blending these kind of body types, blending the realism with the ideal, kind of the idealizing the human form. So he's still using, what that means, I guess, is he's still using these block forms for people. The way that their bodies are in basic shapes, right? Minus we have a contrapposto pose here. So he's blending kind of this realistic aspects. We're looking at linear perspective, right? And it's not perfect, but for the most part, the vanishing point is going to be right around Jesus's face, right? So everything kind of gets directed to Jesus's face, but it doesn't quite add up in all lines. So we're getting there. We're not perfect yet. He's still a master, right? We're looking at, again, use of chiaroscuro, this realistic kind of single light source modeling of human figures, right, from a single light source, gives them very specific visual weight and a far more realistic look. So, it's... but we still see a stacking of people, minus... Peter, of course, in the back. If we don't know that this is tribute money, move this so you can see it. Tribute money. This is the Gospel of Matthew. This is where Jesus tells Peter to find, or that he will find money in the mouth of a fish to pay the temple tax. So we see Jesus here pointing to Peter. Peter is pulling money out of fish. We also see Peter over here with the tax collector, but that's fine. So a lot of visual weight. Again, we see some atmospheric perspective in the mountains, right? We see the shrinking of the trees, right? Receding into the background, so their size diminishes. So on and so forth. But we start to see these types of works coming in. And if you look here, this is a fresco. We've talked about this, right? So the fresco is where you're painting in wet plaster. And that is what we're looking at. This is a fresco painting because that's the way the Greeks and the Romans painted. So of course, that is how the artists of the Renaissance, the early Renaissance, are going to paint. These humanist artists, they are going to pull all of their influences from the Greco-Roman period. So I talked about this when I foreshadowed this one. This is Masaccio as well. This is the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. So Masaccio is a student of, and not literally a student of Giotto. He just studied his style. So guilds, again, when children would go off to guilds, 6, 7, 8 years old, they would go work with masters. and go through trials and tribulations again to become a master themselves. Right, they were in art school, and it's very much similar to how art students and art schools are taught today. There's 3 foundational kind of levels in art school, or to this kind of trajectory of being an artist. You have what is taught first in school is imitation. So you're literally copying people's work and their style. And that's what we see now. And when we get into Raphael, looking at Raphael's guilds and his art schools, we see a lot of the paintings that are attributed to Raphael aren't actually painted by Raphael. They were painted by his students or his pupils, and he would come in and sign them with his name. Shady bastard. But to start first, we need to imitate our idols. We need to imitate our influences, right, by copying them, to learn their style. The second tier to that is emulation, right? So this is where you start modeling things based off of your influences, but you're developing your own style. And then, right, you're starting to be your own, you're coming into your own voice, but you're still showing your influences. That's kind of this idea of emulation. And then the third one is innovation, and this is where you become a master. You've developed a complete, distinct style that is all your own, and that is the hope of all art, I suppose, professors, is that their students are able to innovate at some point in time in their own ways. So he was this very much emulated and idolized Giotto, and we see that in Masaccio's paintings here in his frescoes, because his facial features, the facial expressions, and the way he's modeling his figures are extremely, are very much an imitation and an emulation of Giotto. In particular, kind of go back to the last chapter and look at the Arena Chapel. You're going to start seeing some similarities in his facial features and the facial expressions there. Really, really cool stuff. You get to see where their influences are from. But this is very nice. He's using a more realistic aspect, though, of chiaroscuro to show the form, to give Adam a sense of depth and weight, and like as he's actually in the artwork itself. And nothing more than when I say is the highlight of Masaccio's work is this mural here from the Santa Maria Novella, the Holy Trinity of God the Father and the Holy Spirit, as it were. But this is a really, really beautiful example of linear perspective, one-point linear perspective, because we can see that these lines all kind of come down to a single point. We see a couple different things here as well. So this was commissioned by Lorenzo Lenzi from the Sgraffini family, a very wealthy family in Florence as well. This is made for the Sgraffini private chapel. The Santa Maria Novella is the private chapel of the Sgravinis. And they, again, are blending this classical Greek and Roman style with these biblical stories. See, and this is why when these banking families, this is the church itself could not do certain things, but wealthy families and patrons of the arts, they could pay and have guilds do all sorts of different things that the church would otherwise object to or wouldn't have the flexibility to. So again, showing biblical stories, biblical characters in a very Greek Roman style, very pagan style, is only something that patrons could get away with. But we see the triangles, the perfect form, the Holy Trinity, right? And we also start to see these will be cropping up a lot more. We saw them again. We looked at them. They're called memento moris. Memento moris is a reminder of your mortality or a reminder of death. And there is an inscription at the bottom of this. What you are, I once was, and what I am, you will be. Meaning, we will all die. And we will all end up like this. So, excuse me, the idea is to live a virtuous life, live a humanist life, and strive for perfection, strive for, I guess, moral perfection and intellectual perfection. And that is how you will be able to be allowed to heaven. And we see the donors here, the Scrivinis and Lorenzo Lenzi, here, right, with St. John, Mary, Christ, the Father. So this is probably Masaccio's most famous piece. All right, so I'm going to cut it here, and then we will pick up with part 2.